Beautiful fade out, Jen. Hey, y'all. My name is Christopher June. I use they and she pronouns. I'm the program director here at FCYO. And I'm here today because I want to win. Um, I'm here because I believe in the transformative power of youth organizing to spark an intergenerational movement that can transform the whole of society. That belief is based on history. It's based on the shape of the landscape in this political moment. It's based on the work I've gotten to see you all do. But I don't believe it's just enough to want to win. If it was, amidst all the movement heartbreak that we've all experienced, we would have done it by now. I think that to win, we have to pay careful attention to what we do and how we do it. And I feel very excited and grateful to be in a room of people who I suspect feel the same way. And before we get into our program today, we're just going to do a quick grounding together. There's this Carl Sagan quote. He's a scientist who FCYO staff have heard me reference before. And he has this quote that if you wish to create an apple pie from scratch, you have to first create the universe. And I think that if we want to build a powerful movement that can spark an intergenerational movement to win, we must first show up with our whole selves. So I'm going to ask if folks can just ground together. Find a position, however you're sitting or laying, standing, where you can access the fullness of your breath. And just start to take in breaths in through the nose and out through the mouth. Again, in through the nose and out through the mouth at your own rhythm. And as you inhale, take in this room, 40 of us, with our grounded, liberatory possibility and optimism. And as you exhale out the pessimism, the racial monopoly, capitalism, patriarchy, queerphobia, this moment, breathe in us. And shake it off, even for just the next 52 minutes. Let's do one more breath together, in through the nose, and out with sound. Thank you all for arriving together. I'm going to ask if folks can just put in the chat box. You're all here. You all got the email. What does leveling up mean to you? And it doesn't have to be about the RFP. When you hear those words, what do you think of? Growth and change. That's right. Understanding our past work to be better than before, improvement, experimentation, progress, being in community, gaining skills and confidence to increase your capacity, getting better, expanding knowledge. Yes, I said I suspected that this was the room filled with the right people to take on the work of thinking about the work we do and how we do it in a way that builds an intergenerational movement that can win. And y'all are just reaffirming that belief. So I'm really excited today to dive into, when we say the Level Up Lab, what do we mean? And oh yeah, also Pokemon. And Mary Elizabeth, one thing that's true, right, is when a Pikachu levels up enough, it becomes a Raichu, and you unlock a new set of skills and moves. And so there are these plateaus of leveling up in Pokemon, in whatever, that are suddenly, you're at a new, different state of being where a whole range of new possibilities exist. And this is what I think is possible with youth organizing, and why I'm super, super excited to be alongside y'all in thinking about how we're going to level up together. I'm going to real quick just walk us through the agenda, and then I'm going to pass it on over to JMO to talk about the Gen Power Labs. So we're going to do this opening, some context setting. JMO's going to run us through the Gen Power Labs, where it came from, the work you all did to help make it possible. And then Eric's going to walk us through the Power to Win framework that really guides the Level Up Lab. Then we're just going to do a rundown of what LUL is. Oh, yeah. Shorten it to LUL often, LUL, Level Up Lab, LUL. You'll hear those get used interchangeably. Then we'll have space for questions and answers from you all, and then we'll close. And with that, I'm going to pass it on over to someone who many of you know, the incredible JMO.
Oh, thank you, Christopher June. Super appreciate it. Hi, everyone. Good to see some familiar faces. My name is Jennifer Maldonado. I go by JMO, she, her pronouns, and I'm a program manager at FCYO. I specifically overlook the first tier, which is the Organizing Twin Lab, also known as OWL. I'm calling in from Gabrielino, Tongva, Shumash land, also known as Los Angeles, California. And what really excites me about Gen Power Labs, which launched last year, is the joy and rigor we try to bring to each tier. So it's our 3-tier grant making, capacity building initiative. And if folks want a breather or a refresher, actually the bit.ly is still live. So folks could check that out on our website. And really being that the Gen Power Labs is an outcome of all the work we have done in partnership with you all, with some of y'all in the room. Next slide, please. And I love that I'm getting some like background music. I feel like this is, I don't know if it's Jen. I like it. It's like a music video. And so like just to give a little bit of recap, a little bit of history, and some of y'all are definitely part of this, our story, is that FCYO's theory of change, lays out our vision, a society free from exploitation and oppression, in which communities fully support the wholeness of all peoples. And we had to assess, and we continue to assess, how we meaningfully support and resource the youth organizing field in building the necessary power and means to cause social and structural transformation. So from there, we began to dig into power with Pipelines to Power, right? P2P, which was managed by Hashim Benford, who is now at the Grassroots Policy Project, GPP, one of our consultants for OWL and just, overall Gen Power Labs, and along with our leadership team. And P2P really assessed how we understand power within each organization and the importance of building towards a shared understanding of power more broadly. And Eric will get into the Power to Win framework a little later. Following P2P, the goal of the Youth Power Lab was to collectively assess the youth organizing field together and identify key interventions that will help youth organizing build that meaningful power that we were trying to assess together previously. There was intention to create like deep experimentation. Some folks did do some experimentations individually in organizations, but also COVID-19 hit, right? And it really impacted our work as much as, I know it impacted a lot of y'all's work. And the points of alignment served as a baseline for this cohort in making their assessment. And we'll also drop that in the chat for folks as a refresher. And so all that led to the Gen Power Labs, right? Which is like our experiment, that's why we call them labs, that has been informed in partnership with you all, really in, supporting youth organizing field to coalesce the kinds of power necessary to make those radical changes in society. Next slide. And so the Gen Power Labs is really designed to build that more powerful, strategic, aligned youth organizing field, and granting, increasing the capacities of each org and the field to address the challenges of this moment that we're living in. Next slide. And so this is the whole view of the Gen Power Lab. So each tier is a capacity building, grant making cohort with the goal of increasing, each organization and the field's capacity, like I mentioned, to build towards those long-term, strategies. And it's informed by assessment. So each tier is grounded in informed assessments, right, of our organizations, but also the field. And so folks who are in OWL, we have been doing the strategic education, the organizational assessments, and then bringing it to our peer learning communities and groups, really to reflect on our organizing methodologies and building power. And that's the 1-year cohort. The Level Up Lab, so LOL, I know it's a funny name, is a 2-year grant making initiative. And that's really a chance for folks to get to dive into their organizational assessments that they previously made in either P2P, YPL, or the OWL cohort, with meaningful points of support, right? Different touch points of support. And we'll expand on that later. Christopher June will talk about that more deeply. And then Praxis for Power is our 3-year, it's our 3rd tier cohort, grant making cohort. There's 10 to 12 organizations. Currently we have 12 organizations that completed a design phase where organizations collectively created a hypothesis, and then they'll test collectively, right? And entering their implementation phase to understand how each organization will integrate and implement those hypotheses into the organization. And the goal is to share best movement practices with the field that's tailored to specific conditions. So if you see this as kind of like our organizing model, it's like the breadth, right? And then we build into the depth. And it goes from like how folks can assess the organization, have support to experiment in some of the pivots they're recognizing, and then collectively practice with their peers in the field. Because we know that the right, the conservative, are testing, are organized, right? They're testing on terrains, many terrains that y'all are organizing in. And so this is really, our experiment, our test, to really push, right? And to really build the necessary power in collective, in collectivity with you all. So as we developed the Gen Power Labs, we also realized that we needed a guidepost to orient our work, our capacity work. And in partnership with the field, we developed the Power to Win framework that I'll now pass it to Eric to kind of review for folks.
All right. Hey, everybody. It's great to be here with you all. I'm Eric Braxton, use he, him pronouns. I've been part of the staff team at FCYO for the last 11 years. And before that was a youth organizer with the Philadelphia Student Union, still based in Philly. So I'm going to go over and talk a little bit about this Power to Win framework. Next slide, Jen. So as we created the Gen Power Labs, we realized that we needed to be really clear about what we mean by alignment and power. So we built this Power to Win framework based on the lessons from some of the past initiatives that JMO just talked about as a guide to what do we think are actually the key capacities that youth organizing groups need to build to be able to win transformative change. And so the point here is not to say that there's just one way to organize. We know that the ideas here will have to be adapted and applied to different conditions. But we do think that by having a shared orientation about our long-term vision and how to build power, that we can build a stronger field. So the Power to Win framework consists of a definition of power and 4 interconnected pillars, each with a set of capacities and practices that we'll be trying to build through this work. Next slide, please. So the first part is about defining power. And one of the things that we realized pretty quickly is that if you ask 10 people to define power, you will get 10 different definitions. But one of the best definitions that I've heard is from Martin Luther King, who said that power properly understood is nothing but the ability to achieve purpose. It is the strength required to bring about social, political, and economic change. So when we talk about power, there are 3 quick points that we want to make. First, when we talk about power and the power to win, we mean the power to actually determine social and economic conditions. That means it's not enough just to have a seat at the table or to feel empowered. Our goal is actually to be able to contend for the power to govern, to make decisions that affect our communities. Second, we talk about 3 dimensions of power: base building to move larger numbers of people into action, strategic and tactical alliances to bring together different constituencies and form a bigger we that can win bigger things, and shifting public narratives that can change the common sense of what's possible. And then last, we make a distinction between social power and moral power. And some of you all have heard us talk about this before, but many youth organizing groups are largely built around a model of moral power. This means finding a few charismatic young people that can tell their story and convince decision makers to do the right thing. And there are some things that can be won that way. But we know that some of the big things that are facing our communities are going to require more than just moral power. And so if we want to take on things like climate change and structural racism, we have to be able to build what we call social power, which is the power to force decision makers to do something they didn't already want to do. Right? This can be through voting, striking, or some other form of disruption, and it requires moving a lot of people. Next slide, please. So I'll real briefly go through the other 4 pillars of the Power to Win framework. So the first one is analysis and long-term vision. We know that creating a just and equitable society requires fundamental transformation of the current system, and that is not going to happen overnight, right? Over the last 40 years, the right has used a coordinated strategy to shift the country's policies in their favor. Advancing justice is going to require a similar long-term strategy on our side. And so this means we have to have a shared vision of what does a just and equitable society actually look like, right? We have to have an assessment of the root causes of injustice in the current system. And most importantly, an analysis of power that connects what we do today to our long-term vision. So we think that an organization's analysis and long-term vision are really critical foundation to the approach to building power. Next slide. Right. Second pillar is transformative leadership development. Right. Youth organizing in particular is focused not just on building power right now, but also on developing lifelong political workers. And so we know that we have to support young leaders with a clear analysis and strategy, organizing skills, and also the resilience and emotional intelligence to move through the difficult conditions without sacrificing their well-being. Our belief is that a strong leadership development system is a key to member-led power building. Next slide. The third pillar is organizing for power. So building off an organization's power analysis, that organization has to develop a plan for how do we build the power necessary to actually win our goals. And this requires attention to the 3 dimensions of power that we mentioned before, but we think base building in particular is key, right? If we're serious about organizing, we have to be able to build a significant base. And as organizations gain more power, they move from campaigns focused on immediate needs to structural reforms that can shift the balance of wealth and power, right? And then campaigns also have to have the ability to exert significant social power to compel decision makers to act and build intergenerational alliances that can build the power needed to achieve transformative change. Next slide, please. So the last pillar is assessment and experimentation. So building off of its power analysis, wrong one. Number 4, assessment and experimentation. We know that building transformative power requires developing new capacities and methods, and no one has all the answers. This means we're going to have to engage in bold experiments, be willing to fail, and continually learn from our successes and mistakes to improve our practices. So to build the power to win, it's not enough for individual groups to engage in isolated experiments. We have to invest in shared experiments where we prioritize collective success. This means engaging in honest organizational and movement assessments, coordinated strategies, shared practices, and shared learnings to find out what actually works best. So the willingness to be rigorous, honest, and vulnerable in learning from our work is essential to strengthening our collective capacity to win. So these 4 pillars, and this definition is what makes up this Power to Win framework. We hope that it'll be a useful tool in the hard work of building the skills we need to achieve the transformative change that this moment calls for. And this is what will help guide us in all of the programs of the Gen Power Labs, including the Level Up Lab. And with that, I will pass it back to Christopher June.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, I'm just gonna, returning to what folks shared in the chat. Roshan shared that leveling up to them is having the power tomorrow to do things we couldn't do yesterday or today. So what can we do now to take on this historic mission of building the power to win, which is not going to happen overnight? And Mary Elizabeth, bring us back to Pokemon. Like as a Pokemon levels up, they gain a new move, and then with enough experience, they evolve. Or in nature, for folks who maybe didn't have a Game Boy or whatever, like a flower begins with a seed, and eventually it becomes a stalk, and then from a stalk, you get a flower. And in organization, you may start with just 3 people in a room, but with enough intentional work, you can be part of building a history-making organization. Gen Power Labs is our political project to advance the field. It's guided by the Power to Win framework, as Eric shared, and Level Up Lab, the second tier, is one of the key containers to get from this quantitative change, you're a Pikachu, you're a seed, to the qualitative change, building the powerful field. Next slide, Jen. And so it's the second of the 2 tiers, of the 3 tiers, and it's for graduates of the previous initiatives that JMO highlighted. So Pipelines to Power, the Youth Power Lab, or OWL. Organizations who align with the strategic orientation offered in those programs and are committed to meaningfully shifting their organizational practices to address the growth edges they assessed in these programs. It's a 2-year cohort. It's a grant-making capacity building initiative, and 12 to 18 groups, each will receive $50,000 each year. The program will include the practical, political, and social emotional support necessary for organizations to take on the work of deepening their practices in base building, which is part of that organizing for power pillar, and transformative leadership development, which is a pillar in itself, with the resilience necessary to actually make that possible. So in short, and this is straight from the RFP, in Level Up Lab, organizations will refine the assessments that came out of Pipelines to Power, the Youth Power Lab, and OWL of their current practices in those 2 areas of base building and transformative leadership development. And using this assessment in combination with a grounded assessment of all the internal and external conditions, well, not all, but a series of internal and external conditions particular to your organization, create a hypothesis about how in this 2-year program you're going to strengthen your practices. So your hypothesis will reflect your best guess. We don't know, right? No one could have predicted what would happen during COVID. So we don't know, but it's your best guess grounded in the real conditions of the steps you can take, including the support that you'll need to move from your existing practices to stronger practices in base building and transformative leadership development. So LOA will provide the structure and support to make that possible. I'm going to dive into the why on base building and transformative leadership development, but first I'm just going to define those 2, how we define those 2, so that we're all on the same page. Next slide, Jen. So we define base building as the foundation of organizing. It's what distinguishes organizing from other approaches, this consistent practice of growing the ranks of ordinary people to take collective action to shift power. Building bases capable of wielding social power relative to their terrain is essential for all organizing groups as we define it. Next slide. Transformative leadership development is the process through which an organization develops their leaders and members' political, organizing, and social emotional skills to move them from member to leader to organizer to strategic leadership, with clear ladders of engagement and programmatic work that combines theoretical and practical skills. And so if you go to the next slide, Jen, when we say theoretical and practical, learning how to door knock is both about learning why we door knock, but it also means you have to go out on the doors. It isn't until you actually confront your own feelings about knocking on the doors, about seeing people you know and don't know, that you actually begin to move from a theoretical idea on what it means to build a base to a practical one. And as you learn that practical skill, you can strengthen it with additional sort of theoretical concepts. So we believe there's no base building, no transformative power that can build the power to win without base building. And similarly, there's no base building without transformative leadership development. These two things are in a mutually symbiotically beneficial relationship with one another, a dialectic where each strengthens the other. And we see in history, the history of liberatory struggle demonstrates the potential of this particular intersection. So in the US context, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee is just one example of many of these two intersecting with a strategic vision and a long-term agenda to build the sort of organization that contribute to winning transformative demands that reshaped society, the civil rights bills of the 60s. And in assessing OWL and Praxis for Power, we saw a key sort of hurdle that separated groups in the two was a consistent practice of developing the organizing, political, and social emotional skills of members to then organize more people in the base, not just to have a theoretical set of skills, and build member-driven power that doesn't tokenize young people by assuming they already have everything they need to win, or tokenize young people by assuming that they can't gain those skills. And so that is what Level Up Lab is designed to address. And next slide, Jen. So what do we mean by support? We are talking about practical support, political support, and social emotional support. And practical support can be best sort of understood as tools. So leadership development models, base building charts, coaching, all the things we'll need in our toolbox to actually carry out this work. Political support is sort of like the why, the theoretical underpinning of base building, of the Power to Win framework. So it's political and strategic education. Particularly, one of the key things we'll be doing is a case study in the South African liberation struggle, which we think really hones in on the role of young people in broader movement building with a clear long-term strategic orientation that focused on developing people from the base, their transformative leadership development skills, their political skills, their organizing practices, and transform them as human beings, building with forces beyond just young people, across the race, but led by those with the most to gain from the transformation of society. So we just think it's a really potent example of, and that we drew from heavily in making the Power to Win framework, but of what's possible when building young people in organization. And then lastly is the social emotional support, which should not be taken to sort of mean like none of us are trained therapists, but we do have a set of skills and are hiring consultants with sets of skills to help cultivate what we call resilience practices. And to anchor down on what that means, it's really stuff like conflict mediation tools, developing skills for principled debate, and also skills for the emotional regulation that organizing requires. So, the genuine skill organizers need to develop in building with people. We can't take account for other people's emotions, but we can take account for ours. And that's a necessary thing while building across difference. And we think that the social emotional work allows for pivots to be done inside an organization in a way that builds buy-in and allows for generative conflict, not unprincipled disagreement. It's a genuine skill that we all have to learn. And so these three we think are sort of the sweet spot for actually allowing us to help collectively level up in those two areas, transformative leadership development and base building. Next slide, Jen. So some logistics. Cohort will begin in the fall of 2020. There's 4 6-month sessions, each with one retreat, which if it's safe as it relates to COVID will be in person. And if not, we'll have to figure out how we do that, creative ways to figure that out. and 4 2 to 3 hour virtual sessions with 1 month, quote, off between sessions. So folks won't be in any required programming, but the ongoing work of the practice shift will continue. So the total time commitment required of the participants over the 2 years is 8 to 12 days of in-person gatherings and 32 to 48 hours of virtual sessions. And because organizations are expected to make shifts in your practices, that will require work outside of the cohort time. And we can't give our estimate to that now because we don't know what the scope of the work y'all will take on is, but we're going to work to make sure that we best support organizations in making that possible. Each organization will send 2 to 3 reps to the cohort, and at least one must be a director level position at the organization. And other participants must be approved by FCYO and should be directly supervised by the director level participant or someone who specifically can help implement programmatic shifts. So if the organization is to make shifts, we want the people in the space who are actually taking on and ensuring that work. Click through, Jen. And so I referenced this before, approximately 80 organizations have been invited to apply, and 12 to 18 will get in. And so FCYO is thinking about how to best support organizations who do not get in, who from our time with you all in these previous cohorts, we know is doing really great work. And we want to keep organizations part of the overall Gen Power Lab network, even if they don't in this round advance in this round. Just by virtue of our capacity, there's going to be some organizations who are doing really great stuff who we just don't have the time to be able to do this level of work with. And that is, we're trying to figure out how we're going to handle that as we think about holding the whole political project. So we're considering both our capacity and the needs of the field to sort of ensure that we have the best set of next steps for organizations. Next slide. So applicants must, this is basically, have a history of engaging young people in community organizing with concrete victories that improve their lives, effective organizing campaigns, have a sense of leadership development programs, and include youth in decision making. Have completed one of the 3 mentioned programs and have a 501c3 or fiscal agent. And through participation in a previous FCYO program, we'll be looking for groups who have an ability to make grounded assessments of their strengths and weaknesses, alignment with the framework, and clear, consistent communication. And through the process, we're looking for organizations. So as you fill out your applications, we're looking for organizations to demonstrate your orientation towards building power for long-term transformation, a capacity for honest and vulnerable assessment of your current practices, and this commitment to shifting practices to address growth edges, clarity on the purpose of Level Up Lab, and a commitment to full participation in the cohort. So one of the hats I used to wear was as a grant writer. So I know the sort of temptation to try and copy and paste the answer from another application that best fits this one and really demonstrates the work your organization has done. We ask that you don't do that. This isn't just a funding project. It's a political project we're all trying to take on of sharpening the field. Apply because you want to be a part of that. And in the RFP it says, as part of our ongoing commitment to accurate assessment, we're more interested in grounded assessments of your practice than posturing, than puffing up our collective chests and saying that we've won incredible things, when that might not be true. We're also not interested in too harsh self-criticism. This isn't supposed to be a space where you just shit talk all the things that maybe you're doing right and you want to make look bad because we're asking for vulnerability. No, we want just grounded assessments from you all. Vulnerable, honest assessments. And as we build the cohort, we're going to look to make sure that we're representing and building a diverse cohort representative of the broader field across geography, across race and gender, and across issue area. Next slide, Jen. And so there was a slight, just general snafu. Some parts of the RFP said May 13th, some said May 20th. So just want to clear up that is May 20th, and that's on me. So last week we released the request for RFPs. Today you all are on this webinar, and we'll send the recording as soon as it's available. May 20th is when the full proposal is due, and May 20th through June 21st is when we will be reviewing. We'll have a team of FCYO staff, conveners who are going to be part of building out the program, and folks from the field who are not applying to Level Up Lab as grouping of readers to read the applications. And at the end of June, we'll make announcements. During the reading process, we may ask some organizations for an interview. An interview is not necessarily the acknowledgement of an advancing to the next stage or a sign that you're not going to advance, but rather just a space for us to get clarity about anything that we may need clarity on. And with that, Eric is going to walk us through a little bit of the SM Apply portal, and then we'll have some time at the end for questions.
Okay, all right. I get the fun job of helping to walk everybody through using the SM Apply system. I think some of you have probably used this before for some of our tools, but we just want to make sure that people are, really familiar with it, know how to use this tool. So I will just try to walk you through it, and we'll see if I can pull it off myself. So this is the SM Apply site where people start out applications for any of the FCYO programs. If you are new and haven't done this before and don't have a login, you will have to register here. If you already do, then you can just log in and it should have some of your information saved. So I will log in. In this case, right, I'm going to be an applicant. So it says I haven't applied for any programs yet. So then I will go down here to Level Up Lab. Right. It's got the full RFP listed here. So if you have questions about that, you can see all of the content from the RFP listed right here. And we go to apply, right? The first step is just this eligibility thing. So you'll have to tell us like which member that to be eligible, you have to have been in one of these programs. So it'll ask you which one you were a part of, right? So you can click one of those there. If you were in more than one, it doesn't matter. I think you can only click one, but just click one of those, mark as complete, right? And then you will submit that. And then once you do that, it'll give you access to start the full proposal here, right? So, and once you tell us which one you're in, you get the full proposal. So the full proposal is broken into a few different sections. So you have your basic organizational information. If you have a fiscal agent, we'll need to know who your fiscal agent is, and just some basic information about the organization that goes here. Pretty straightforward stuff, right? Then the next part is where you would enter your EIN, employer identification number. Should be on your 501c3 letter or that of your fiscal agent. That is something that we're required to have in order to be able to make the grants. So there's that. There's this section here, which is the Youth Organizing Landscape Mapped opt-in. And let me just explain this one for a second. People may have seen that the FCYO website for a long time has had this interactive map. It used to be the first step in our proposals. It needs some tech upgrades right now. So instead of asking people to do that, we're asking you to share some basic information here. So if you click yes, then it's going to ask some basic information, ask you if you're willing to have us share this information on our map when it gets rebuilt. And this should just save your organization time. If we collect this information here, then we can share it on the map. It's mostly publicly accessible information anyway. But if you don't want that information shared on the map, you can just click no. Then there's some information for you to upload, your 501c3 letter or that of your fiscal sponsors, a recently signed W-9 form. Those are things that'll just help us make the grant, and then an organization budget from the current year, right? So for your organization, your current year budget. Then the main thing here is where the narrative responses, these are actually the application questions. We listed here at the top some of the definitions of base building, power, all of that stuff, right? And then there's a handful of questions, right? And again, as Christopher June said, this is where we really want to encourage people to bring, what we're looking for is honest assessment of strengths and weaknesses, right? So the first question is, what are your biggest strengths and challenges in terms of building power? There's a 500-word maximum for that. Then we ask you to rate from 1 to 5 where you are in terms of base building, transformative leadership development, organizational assessment, right? There are definitions of those things above if you need to refer to them. So just rate from 1 to 5, and then 3 to 5 sentences on each of those 3 about why you answered it the way you did. So for base building, if you were a 3, why did you say 3 in 3 to 5 sentences? Same for the other 2. Again, really looking for that honest assessment. Third question, taking into account your response to 2, what areas of focus, base building or transformative leadership development, feel most critical for you, right? And what does it make possible for long-term power building? Why do you want to focus on that, right? Number 4, what do you think the process would be to implement the shift in question 3? Like, so if you're going to improve in that area, what's the process you're actually going to go through? And how might you move through these shifts, and what support could Lowell provide you to make it possible? And 5, we want to know, if you were in the program, who would be the organizational representatives? What programmatic or campaign work do they do? Remember that it's important for at least one of the people to be an executive director or an organizational leadership. And then tell us a little bit about who would be in the program and what they'd be bringing to that. And then last question, so for organizations, if you were part of one of these last cohorts and that person is still there and can speak to it, speak to the program that you are part of, either Pipelines to Power, Youth Power Lab, or OWL. How did that shape your interest, right? What was it like going through that last program, and how did that shape your interest in this program? If you're in a case where you've had organizational transitions, none of the people that were in those programs are still in the organization, you're not really able to answer A, then answer B, which is what makes you interested in Lowell, and how, if all, do you understand the impact of those past programs? So those are the questions. Once you fill all that, you can mark as complete. If you have problems in the RFP, there's emails. You can email us with any trouble that you have with the system. But as long as you're logged in and able to access that stuff, it shouldn't be too much trouble. Remember that, like the legal documents, 501c3, that stuff should be for your fiscal sponsor if you have one. And that is the SM Apply system. I will pass it back to Christopher June.
Thanks. And one other note from that, it says it at the top of the RFP. We put a 500-word max because both Eric and I have written grants where the word limit has felt too short to answer the question that was being asked. But you don't have to reach 500 words. If you answer the question in as many words as is necessary. And with that, I'm going to open it up for questions. Yeah, folks have any questions about Level Up Lab? Yeah, so we would do the sessions would take place probably if we're doing four of them in a rotating series to sort of make sure that everyone has a roughly equal travel burden as much as possible. In places where it would be, we could maximize sort of like COVID safety through outdoor time, etc. And FCY would cover the cost of housing and travel and food, etc., to make sure participants would be able to make it. Thank you, Nusrat. Yeah, so I mean, one is just we'll be reading the document Path to Power about the South African freedom struggle. We're going to be drawing on some of the foundational strategic education that folks have already done to deepen sort of our collective understanding of what base building is, make sure we have shared definition, and then use our tools to help guide that. Um, yeah, so those are like some of the sorts of things. So we'll definitely be diving into a few different leadership develop ladder models. Folks will be able to share and offer input on those, that sort of thing. And as far as political case studies, other than the South African apartheid struggle, we'll also be drawing some on the role of young people in the civil rights movement and how that shaped, yeah, the civil rights movement overall. Thank you, David. So, I mean, I think we'll have to do some based on organizations that are in the cohort. We're giving ourselves ample runway to prepare content that will actually meet the needs of the organizations. And so the relationship between policy work, as you named it, and base building is one that we'll investigate as it relates to the need of the cohort. And I don't off the top of my head have the best recommendation on policy, but I would just offer that, I mean, like the legislative work of the civil rights movement is a great example of the intersection between winning policy and building a base.
Let me just say the question there, because for the recording, I don't know if they'll see the questions in the chat. So we should make sure to read them out loud. So David's question was, in answering questions, what do you recommend for going into depth on policy work if we want to talk about it in relationship to our base building? So that was the last question for all of you who are watching this recording.
Can I clarify too? It's in us answering the questions for LUL, you know?
Oh, okay. And so what's your specific question, David?
Is understanding that it's like a C3, right, grant? And like, if we were to talk about our work with legislative session and lobbying, that may not be allowed or as relevant. So it's like, how much can we talk about that kind of stuff?
This is
answering questions, yeah.
I can take that one. Yeah, this is a C3 funding. That's right. So you should talk primarily about your C3 work, right? So the work of and frankly, what we're most interested in is building power, base building, that kind of thing. We're not necessarily asking you for, right, like what were the specific policy, you know, like the details of the policy advocacy strategy. So you should talk primarily about your C3 related work, right? And there's, you know, you're allowed to do any C3 advocacy and lobbying that you're allowed to do, you are welcome to talk about. But in general, right, when applying for C3 funding, you shouldn't put in the proposals things about direct electoral or lobbying work that doesn't fit into that. Yeah.
And I can just answer, the funding is general operating support funding. Yeah, we are a funding intermediary who organizes from all sorts of sort of walks of philanthropy is where that money comes from. Oh, sorry, there are questions about both, is this money specifically for youth work? Is it designated to go anywhere? And it's general operating support, but the work we're looking to transform is the youth work, including within an intergenerational organizing group. We'd be looking at sort of like the relationship between the work of organizing young people and the broader intergenerational work. And then Emil asked about sort of like where do the funds come from, and are they to support orgs and being able to participate? I think, yeah, the goal is to be able to support organizations to participate and provide some additional operating support funds. And we know that some of that depends on how many hours are folks spending outside of the cohort on practice shifts. So obviously have an impact on how organizations relate to that money. And they come from a variety of different funding sources. Cool. Any other questions as we move towards our close? And grateful for folks' excitement. Great. Thank you all so much. And if you do have additional questions, if there are questions about the portal, Jen, can you pull up the slide that is our emails? Yeah, if there are questions about the portal, I would recommend emailing Jen at fcyo.org, who is our portal expert and who knows way more about it than me and makes so much of our work possible. Thank you so much, Jen, for all your work on the back end. And if you have questions, I'm not going to be able, just to be transparent, the questions are not like, if you have questions about the quality of your application, that is not a question that I can ask. But if there are questions about sort of like anything clarifying things, then I'm happy to hop on a call and chat with folks a little bit about that. And you can reach me at christopher@fcyo.org. So with that, and so we're working, Jen's going to make sure that the portal switches over to May 20th at 11:59 Pacific time PM to make sure that that's covered within these next few days. And sorry again about that miscommunication. But really, really excited, y'all. I think that there is genuine transformative possibility for young people in this moment to build organizations. And having gotten to be in a relationship with you all, largely through OWL, I'm like really excited to see the organizational trajectories and to be a part of helping shape that. So with that, I'm just gonna kick it on over to Eric. Anything you want to close with before we close out?
Right. Yeah, thank you so much, Christopher June. I just want to say thank you to everybody for being here, and thanks for all of the work that you are doing that makes all of this possible. We know how difficult it is to raise money for youth organizing groups, and we know the challenges about building real strong partnerships between funders and organizing groups, and that's our aim, right? Is to figure out how to be in real authentic partnership with you all. So deep appreciation for all of the organizing work that you do every day. We hope that this program, like the other Gen Power Labs program, is going to be part of the work that we need to do to build a field that's actually capable of winning the changes that we need in this very historic moment that we're in. We also, as Christopher June said, know that not everybody is going to be able to get into this program. We're sorry about that, that we don't have enough money to be able to fund all of the amazing work that everybody is doing, but we want to stay in relationship with all of your organizations, and we're going to be looking for ways to raise additional resources. You may have seen that we also recently released an RFP for a climate fund that is wide open. Organizations can apply for both of those. We will make a distinction about which one we think is actually the better fit. So people will only be able to be in one, but you are more than welcome to apply for both of those. So know that we aren't always able to fund every organization that's doing fabulous work, but that we do really want to be in relationship with your organizations, and we'll continue to try to advocate. And again, just deep appreciation for the work that you're doing to build your organizations, to do this work, and to think critically about how we build the power power of young people. This is a critical moment in history right now. We are more convinced than ever that the leadership of young people of color, working class young people, queer and trans youth is going to be at the center of building the movements we need to build the kind of world that we all want to live in. So thank you for doing that work, and thanks for being partners in it. And we look forward to staying connected. Take care, everybody.
Thanks so much, y'all.